The incumbent is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
So let's start with political ideology. Each candidate here is running under the banner of the Democratic Party to be the Democratic Party's nominee for the 14th Congressional District in Congress. What are the values of the Democratic Party that you support, and how will you pursue them in the next congressional term? And if there are values you don't support, let's address those as well. I'll throw out just a couple of historically championed issues by Democrats, like universal health care, environmental and economic justice, and things like that. Let's talk about the Democratic Party and your participation in the party in this race.
Of course, and thank you so very much again. It's always an incredible opportunity to be here and to speak to our community. You know, the question was, what is the Democratic Party, and what do we fight for, and what do we believe in? And this has always been at the core of my entire tenure so far in my first term in Congress. I believe unapologetically in 21st century economic, human, and social rights, an agenda of racial justice that makes sure and guarantees that every American has access to opportunity and dignity at work. That means I believe that healthcare is a human right. I believe, especially now that we're seeing in this pandemic, that healthcare should be guaranteed to every person in the United States of America. I believe in a living wage. I believe that no person should be too poor to live and to be paid a wage less than their ability to pay for rent, rent, food, healthcare, and more. I believe that education is a human right, and then college should never be out of economic reach. And in fact, I believe that public colleges and universities should be tuition free, much like they were and much like they were in the past. Our CUNY system was already there. And we have slowly escalated the costs of living outside of what's even tenable for working Americans. I didn't waitress as a summer job or have a high school job. That was my life. I'm a daughter of a domestic worker. My mom cleaned houses, and I did homework on other people's staircases growing up. And I was a waitress until 2 years ago, when I had the great honor and the great privilege of being selected by our community to serve as the youngest woman ever elected to the United States Congress. And I've taken that spirit and made sure that we pushed the Democratic Party, not just accept the status quo, but push to make sure that we are guaranteeing an environmental future, an economic future, and a just future for all Americans, including our immigrant community here in New York City. Of course. Thank you, Gary. I'm proud to say that I'm the most present member of Congress that has ever, I would say, that has served in the seat rather in modern history. And I take an enormous amount of pride in the fact that virtually every time Congress is out of session, I am here at home. I have personally raised close to $500,000 for our district and our community for food pantries and deliver meals myself every single week in LaFrac City, Allerton, etc. Now, the grief, I suppose, the grievance that Ms. Caruso-Cabrera, apologies, has is that I spent several days after one vote in March in my apartment, and the fact of the matter was that I wasn't feeling very well, and I wanted to take a few days. And I'm proud to say that we continue to have a strong field force on the ground, and this is the benefit of being a movement candidate. Again, I've continued to raise over almost $500,000 for food pantries, delivering meals myself, while also advocating for broader systemic change in Washington.
Thank you. You get the final word.
25,000 jobs. That's the least you could do after driving away $27 billion in tax revenue that we could have had. Imagine if we had those jobs that you drove away right now to help us get back on our feet.
All right, thank you very much.
You were in your apartment. You told everyone you were in the Bronx. You said so in Spanish.
Completely false.
Hello to everyone here in the Bronx.
Okay,
you said Spanish to people. Why?
Let's move on to the next question, because the next question I have is about jobs, and so let's address that directly. So this, according to our prior agreement, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez gets the next one. Unemployment in New York and across the country has shattered all records, obviously. As the pandemic eases over time, what's the best path to generate those jobs and get people back to work?
It is so important that we understand exactly how serious this situation is economically and in terms of our public health, especially in the context of COVID-19. What we have seen and what we are going through is an unprecedented economic crisis unlike any of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. And even as many of these states try to go back against the advice, try to reopen against the advice of public health experts and others, one of the things that we need to understand is that even if we snapped our fingers and reopened tomorrow, there are still going to be millions of jobs that will not immediately come back. And so what we need to do is make sure that we return to New Deal era style policies where we have huge investments, direct investments in jobs, not crony tax breaks, not corrupt deals for real estate developers and Wall Street CEOs, but direct investments that spur small businesses immediately, and making sure that we invest in infrastructure projects, rebuilding our schools, cleaning our air. And frankly, we knew that a crisis like this was coming. If it wasn't going to be coronavirus, we knew that there was going to be an enormous, that climate change in and of itself, whether it's Hurricane Sandy or others, present enormous economic crises. And it was with that foresight that I had the privilege and the honor of working with Senator Ed Markey in making sure that we co-authored one of the most progressive and wide-ranging infrastructure and jobs projects, the Green New Deal, that was endorsed by virtually every presidential candidate this cycle. We need to make sure that we have direct investments and that demand must be spurred in order to kickstart our economy and create millions of jobs.
My opponent, AOC, voted against the stimulus bill. She voted against coronavirus testing. She voted against hospitals, and she voted against money for small businesses. Those are jobs. I was just in Westchester Square this past week, and they were very pleased to have received those PPP loans, many of them. And they had already done all kinds of things to keep people working. One store owner told me he had an old life insurance policy that he forgot about. He took out a loan against it to keep people employed. People, small business owners, if they could, they've done everything they can, but they needed extra help. And they got it through the PPP, but not because of my opponent. She voted against it. She voted against healthcare. She voted against coronavirus testing, and she voted against small mom and pop businesses.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you have the final word on this.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Gary. You know, I think if you can ask any small business owner, especially those in Queens and the Bronx, the reason I opposed PPP is because it is structured to benefit Wall Street, the wealthy, and the rich. And it is not structured in a way to optimize outcomes for small businesses. And anyone who reads this legislation can see how toxic there were, and they were holding hospitals hostage, holding funding hostage so that the Lakers, so that Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and so that Shake Shack could get bailouts. There are some small businesses that receive PPP, but you go to our community and you will see how many small businesses were denied, were left hanging out to dry. Oh, and by the way, you know what else is in that bill? You know what I actually voted against? A $500 billion, no strings attached Wall Street bailout for Steven Mnuchin, Donald Trump, and all of their friends. And that kind of corruption and the tolerance for it is unacceptable. Which
That's
is
not why you voted against it.
By the way, that first
you voted against it to be the only one
that
in the headlines.
Ms. Caruso-Cabrera will give you a chance to speak. Just raise your hand. Because if you interrupt, it is chaos, okay?
Understood.
So just raise your hand. I'll make sure we're not looking to cut off any debate or dialogue. So let her finish, and then you'll get your chance to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Gary. By the way, that first bill cut out immigrants, ITIN payers, and it cut out American citizens married to immigrants. Now, I know Ms. Cabrera may find that acceptable, and I know that she may think that that's a good deal, but in a district that is 50% immigrant, I will never, ever leave our immigrant families behind. It is unacceptable to me.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you get the final word on this.
Thank you so much. And, honestly, I know she may be my opponent in this race, but Ms. Khan really said it. We know that this legislation was not set up for us to win. And that's why, our district is one of the most progressive districts in America. And we know that power in Washington and established power is not just about left and right. It's about up and down. And there is an enormous amount of pressure to conform in Washington. And yes, a lot of times I will stand up and say, we can do better. And sometimes that means being a lonely voice. But our constituents called me, and I listened to our office because I listen to our community. I'm not financed by multimillionaires and bank CEOs. I'm financed by small dollar, everyday people. And so do you want to know something, Gary? On the eve of that stimulus vote, I had more calls coming into my office saying to not support the bill rather than to support it. Our community knew we were getting a raw deal. That's what they told me. And because I am loyal to our community, I took that input and did my job and represented their view on the floor of the House, even though it sometimes means standing up to the most powerful people in the country.
My opponent, AOC, said she had received many, many calls before that stimulus vote. I don't know how that's possible because her office is never open. She never opened an office actually in her district in the Bronx. And the one that she did open, I drove past last week and it was closed in the middle of the week. How are you getting calls? AOC, you're always my name.
Let's let her respond to that, and then let's move on. Thank you.
Sure. I know Ms. Caruso-Cabrera isn't from the district, so she may have some trouble finding her way around. But I believe she visited my campaign office, which is not my congressional office. And then secondly, I have had 2 operating offices. My Bronx office is co-located with Assemblywoman Karines Reyes due to the extraordinarily high cost of rent. But I am happy to say that our office has set a record in that we have received 2 congressional awards. The first in history where a freshman office, and we share that honor with Congresswoman Donna Shalala, the first in history where we have received 2 of these congressional awards for congressional operations in innovation and culture. I'm happy to say that we have successfully resolved, we've reunited families, we have answered thousands of calls. As a strong voice in Congress, I receive up to 3,000 calls per day, and every day we screen every single one of them to prioritize and answer our constituents first. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Obviously, healthcare has always been a priority, but in the middle of this pandemic, it's been raised considerably on the priority scale. There are a range of proposals and possibilities. I will list just some of them: Obamacare, single payer, universal, private based, public option, Medicare for all. What plan can be realistically achieved in the next session, and what plan would you advocate for in the House of Representatives?
I believe that healthcare should be guaranteed in the United States of America, and that is why I support single payer Medicare for all in the United States. It is the one system and it is the one policy that we know can actually guarantee health care. And the reason that is so important, health care is so important, is because words like accessibility and words like access to and words like choice are big pharma lobbyist code words. Because the reason we talk about, they say access and choice, is because everyone has access, to buy a $1,000 a month healthcare plan. Everyone has access. Even when I was a waitress 2 years ago, I had to use the Obamacare exchange. Obamacare is an enormous improvement on what there was before, which was nothing. But at the end of the day, I had to pay almost $200 a month for an $8,000 deductible on a waitress's salary. And do you know what that means? It means you don't go to the doctor. So what we really need to do is really try to move towards systems like also Canada, South Korea, the UK. And I believe that in terms of our possibilities for the next term, which was also the question that you asked, Gary, what is possible for next term? That is one of the reasons why we are working together. You know, people say divisiveness and all of this stuff. Listen, not all Democrats are the same. Some Democrats believe in not protecting immigrant rights. Other Democrats believe that we should subsidize big pharma and healthcare corporations. I'll be very honest about that. But we can come together too. We will have our differences. But that's also, that's also the reason why I speak with Vice President Biden and try to push and try to see what our possibilities for our next term are. And in that, I believe that we can continue our fight and try to make sure that we mobilize everyday people to guarantee healthcare in the United States of America, because the folks that are left behind in the cracks are the same essential workers, Uber drivers, domestic workers, home healthcare aides. And by the way, yes, unions support Medicare for all because it is wrong. It is wrong to give up your wages because we only have our primary system is employer-sponsored health insurance in the United States. And in a time of 30 million people suddenly unemployed, I think we all realize how broken our current system is, and the fact that employer-dependent healthcare and health insurance, rather, is one of the least stable systems that we could have. I do not believe in expanding that system. I don't believe in even subsidizing it. I believe in changing it.
My opponent, AOC, says she's working to help Joe Biden, but she told New York Magazine that she groaned out loud because she's in the same party as Joe Biden. In any other country, she said they wouldn't be in the same party. She's right, because she's not a Democrat. She's a democratic socialist, and she's working to divide the party like she did last time, and she continues to do every day.
Do you want to respond to that before we just conclude this question, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez?
Absolutely. Well, I'm very happy to have the support of my colleagues in the New York delegation. I'm very happy to work very well and collaborate a lot with our fellow members. In fact, I have co-sponsored hundreds of bills, many of which have become law, with both Democratic and, believe it or not, Republican colleagues. I make my views known. And I'm not afraid to fight for what I believe is the right thing for our constituents. And while some people may call that divisive, I believe that I work very closely with our colleagues. And by the way, I think that it's just called clarity. I don't poll test what I believe. I don't change my beliefs. And by the way, I may be, aside from Ms. Khan, the only person in this race that actually has policy positions on their website. I commit to stances. I commit to our district. And I don't go around and run based on how awful Ms. Khan may be or how awful Ms. Caruso-Cabrera may be. I'm not running based on how negative stances on them or tearing them down. I'm running based on building our community up.
Let's talk about the proposed Green New Deal. I suppose on the environmental protection scale, the Green New Deal is on one end, and the Trump administration's elimination of dozens of EPA regulations are on the other end. Is a massive policy package that would remake the U.S. economy and eliminate all U.S. carbon emissions realistic, doable, and ultimately the right way to go at this time?
I'm proud to be a co-sponsor. And in fact, I'm proud to be an original author of the Green New Deal. And by the way, didn't do that alone. I did it with the mentorship of one of the greatest climate leaders in Congress, Senator Ed Markey. And by the way, people talk about divisiveness. It was my first major piece of legislation that I had dropped. And we have over 100 Democrats co-sponsored onto the Green New Deal. Now, the Green New Deal is a framework. It's a framework informed by our lives here in the Bronx and Queens. It's informed by the fact that the Bronx has some of the highest childhood asthma rates in the country, and that is an environmental equity issue. Our air is being dumped on, our water is being poisoned. NYCHA in and of itself is an environmental crisis, which, by the way, is why I followed it up with unprecedented infrastructure bills in the Green New Deal for public housing, which would make sure that we retrofit NYCHA buildings, clean the air, strip lead from paint and water, and make sure that people have a basic human right to clean air, clean water, and an equitable environment to live in. I am proud to say that, yes, I do introduce innovative, bold, new ideas that maybe people at first glance may find surprising. But guess what? I stay at it. And I'm happy to say that I have been named by Vice President Biden and by Senator Bernie Sanders to the Unity Task Force to make sure that we draft the Democratic platform on environmental issues and climate change for the next term and for the future.
Cabrera gets the final word.
Of course, I'd like to thank Ms. Khan for actually talking about policy in this debate. Thank you so much. You bring up an important element of our energy mix, which is nuclear. And this is absolutely a critical part of this conversation. And so one thing that I would just like to clarify is that the Green New Deal does leave the door open for nuclear. You are right. We name renewables like wind and solar specifically. The door is open for nuclear, but we also have to make sure that community input and the technology is vetted. I do believe that there is an open door there. And in terms of the Green New Deal is a resolution. It's a statement of frameworks and values upon which climate policy should be drafted. Because the last thing we want to happen is for oil barons to turn into solar barons and for energy workers to continue to be marginalized, paid less than a living wage, and put in dangerous conditions where their lives are at risk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Caruso-Cabrera, go ahead.
My opponent, AOC, calls her legislation bold. It is, in fact, ineffectual. It is silent on China and India, the greatest polluters in the world. And we could do everything right here in the United States, and it will have no impact unless they change their ways. And I'm very interested to hear her talk about the air and the water, because she always said about her predecessor, he doesn't drink our water, he doesn't breathe our air. And yet she does the same thing. She doesn't come home. AOC is MIA. She wasn't breathing the air here when she stayed in her apartment for a full week, her luxury apartment in DC with a Whole Foods in the lobby at the height of the crisis when Congress wasn't in session. She's the one not breathing our air or drinking our water.
Thank you. We'll take a short break. You'll get a response and we'll move on. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez wanted to respond to that.
Yes, thank you. And while it's disappointing to see Ms. Caruso-Cabrera fixated on personal attacks and for some strange reason obsessed with the 6 days in March that I wasn't feeling well and had to stay in my apartment, I do think it's quite funny that she goes on and on about the fact that I have to live, that frankly, that I spend time in doing my job in Washington and coming home to the Bronx when she lived in a $15,000 a month Trump Tower apartment until 6 months ago. This woman probably couldn't even find Sunnyside on a map until she decided to challenge me for the sake of challenging me. She doesn't care about the Bronx. She doesn't care about Queens. She cares about running for running. No one's ever seen this person before. Who are you? Like, where is your family from? No, where have you lived? No one has seen you in this community before. And while I know you have multi-millionaires that finance your campaign and you're financed by the same real estate developers and big banks that would profit from the corruption in Washington and adding one more notch to their belt, I don't think it's important for us to do that. I don't think it's okay for us to do that.
Ms. Caruso-Cabrera, presumably you want to respond to that. And then I do want to get the final question in. Go ahead.
Sure. Greetings from Sunnyside, Queens. I love Sunnyside, Queens. I love New York. I wish I had been born in New York. Unfortunately, I wasn't. My opponent is the one that nobody ever sees in the district. Let me tell you, the second this crisis started, I started delivering food and I started delivering masks. We went to RAIN up on Morris Park Avenue. We went to the Bronx Jewish Community Council up in the northwestern part of the district. I've been to Iglesia de la Familia. I've been to the Vishnu Hindu Temple. I have delivered nearly 50,000 masks and food and hand sanitizer to Jacobi Hospital, which I'm not sure you could have found on a map, AOC, when this crisis started. Every day, when I go out in the community, people tell me they never see you. They say AOC is MIA.
All right, thank you very much. This district, the 14th district in both the Bronx and Queens, is largely an immigrant district. The president and the GOP have said over and over that Democrats want open borders. There are 4 Democrats here. Do any of you support open borders? If not, how would you like to see the nation's immigration policies renewed, revised, and amended? Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, that's for you.
Thank you very much. I do not believe in open borders, but I do believe in safe passage. And I believe that our immigrant families deserve to be protected, especially in this time when our president and our hostile Republican administration is attacking and targeting our families at all costs. I do believe that ICE has committed human rights abuses and has a structure that is inherently corrupted. We have to make sure that we take a new approach to immigration, one that is not centered on the marginalization and attacking of our families, but one that is centered in American values of ensuring that families can be reunited. I'm proud to have reunited families that were separated, and to take fathers and mothers out of ICE detention, to fight for children. Just a few weeks ago.
Excuse me, I just want to interject that we are running out of time, so let's keep things as short as possible for each candidate.
I'll end on this. Just a few weeks ago, I was called last minute by a community group that five or six children were being transported into LaGuardia Airport into a pandemic zone. And within the drop of a hat, because I am here all the time, because it's not just a campaign line, because this is where my family is. This is where my uncle is. This is where my brother is. This is where my family is. I dropped everything and headed to LaGuardia Airport to get those 6 kids and follow up and make sure that they were safe.
Thank you very much. You get the final word on this question, and then we'll do closing comments. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Well, I hope, it's my hope that, and it's my belief that you can come after me all you want. Leave my mom out of it. My mother is a widow. My mother is a school secretary that makes an hourly wage that's laid off right now. She doesn't, and you don't know her life. You don't know what she's been through. So please leave my mother out of this. It's really wrong. Now, that being said, I do believe that immigration is a top priority for our district. And I think that it's one that our families' lives hinge upon. I work so consistently with our district, whether it's Corona, whether it's our Bangladeshi brothers and sisters, our family, whether it's our West African family, whether it's our Latino family here in the district.
Got about 15 seconds.
The top casework that we get coming to our office is immigration related. And we have to take a whole system approach, because what's happening right now has been weaponized by the Trump administration. And we have to not just roll back it, but we have to transition to a positive space.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, your turn.
It has been the privilege and honor of a lifetime every single day that I wake up to have been trusted by our community and to be trusted by our community to stand up even when it is hardest in Washington. I'm proud to have co-sponsored and authored legislation that has passed in the United States House of Representatives. And while always being true, never giving up, never selling out, while also pushing the bounds of what is possible. That's my job, but that's also our job as one of the most progressive districts in America. I'm proud to serve and be in this community almost every single day that I'm not called to votes in Washington. I'm proud to be able to serve our community and to have an award-winning constituent services office. And I'm proud to continue to fight for healthcare, housing, and education as human rights in the United States of America.